Good morning, good afternoon. Thanks so much for everyone who's joining us today for this webinar on an information session on the Better Climate Challenge. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Maria Vargas. I am the director of the Better Buildings Initiative at the U.S. Department of Energy, and I'm joined today by my colleague Joe Invick, who works at RETEC Advisors. And between the two of us, we're gonna walk you through not only the challenge, but hopefully answer all the questions that you might have about this very exciting opportunity that we are hoping that many, if not all of you, will join with us on. So if we can go to the next slide, we do want to hear your questions. So if folks will please do us, if you're interested in asking questions, if you will go to slido.com and you can enter the event code, which is DOE. I believe that's either uppercase or lowercase, but if you will do hashtag DOE as the event code, I believe the hashtag's already there, so just type in DOE, and we'd be thrilled to take your questions. And just two other, as everyone probably knows, because we're all used to these virtual meetings and webinars, please do know that we are recording today's session. And if you haven't already, if you mute your headphones or speakers, that would be terrific. I think that'll make it easy for everyone. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. Thanks to everybody again for joining us today. This is how we are planning to spend the next hour with all of you. We're going to talk a little bit about the opportunity that exists in front of all of us and the work we're hoping to do, again, with all of you moving ahead. We're going to talk specifically about what we've recently launched and announced as an opportunity for us to work in continued partnership with all different sectors of the U.S. economy, public and private, the Better Climate Challenge. We'll talk a little bit about next steps. And then very importantly, we'll try and get through all of that in the first half hour so that we can leave a good amount of time at the end for questions and answers. So that's how we're going to use today. So if we can go to the next slide, let's just jump in. Why is the Department of Energy doing this? This really sums up the opportunity that we want to talk to you about today. I think everyone on this call knows that climate change is a real issue. It's an issue for our country, but certainly for the whole world as well. And when we think about the opportunity to address climate change and really help leading in its mitigation, we know that many organizations have set goals around renewable energy, goals around carbon reduction, goals about greenhouse gas reductions. And that is terrific because that's what the world needs. The world needs leadership. The world, though, I think critically also needs now action, near-term action, and pathways. The pathways to get to decarbonization are going to be varied and they're going to be different. And we need to capture those so that we're all learning from each other so that we can move as fast as we can as a country and really as a world moving forward. So our hope today is describing a little bit about what the Department of Energy is doing as we challenge organizations to set really ambitious portfolio-wide and near-term operational greenhouse gas carbon reduction goals, with very much learning from the DNA that we have had in the past of the Better Buildings Initiative and certainly the Better Buildings and Better Plants Challenge, when we are able to profile and learn from leaders and understand what they're doing and the innovation they're sharing so other people can not only understand your leadership, but follow in your footsteps. And the opportunity here is for you to join in what we are considering the government platform that's really going to provide that transparency and accountability, and equally importantly, the technical assistance and the collaboration to help you meet your organizational goals, to understand the different pathways and opportunities, and to recognize you for that leadership, not only in what your organization is doing, but in the leadership that you're providing the rest of the country as we move forward, trying to address this really important issue. So if we can move to the next slide, that's what we're going to talk about. So now we're going to talk about some more of the specifics. So we mentioned, I know many of you, my guess is many of you on this call have set goals of some sort. And, we are very cognizant of that. But I think, one of the things that we have learned in working with our Better Buildings and Better Plants partners over the past decade is that a lot of organizations have done a lot of work in this area and specifically on energy efficiency and are now asking us what's next. And as those organizations have set goals, I think oftentimes the next piece, the how do I get it done, is the missing piece. And so the focus very much of what we're doing is to really identify, understand, and work with you on pathways to achieve the carbon reduction targets, the very aggressive carbon reduction targets that organizations have committed to. There are lots of challenges with that, right? So you can see many of those on the slide. In many cases, the technology solutions is not always obvious or may not exist. In-house expertise for integrated extensive planning is not available or hasn't been prioritized. I think we need pathways for all different kinds of buildings across all different kinds of end uses across the whole United States. And so we want to really focus on an opportunity that we have working together to really address those barriers and set, near-term goals that allow for and really indeed thrive on transparency and sharing of results, sharing of best practices, sharing of where we're all getting stuck, with the hope that that feedback loop to the Department of Energy, as well as other federal entities and other organizations working on this, really becomes a very powerful feedback loop in the market to making sure that organizations are getting the solutions that they need to meet the reduction goals. So really, partnership, leadership, and sharing pathways are the keys to our success collectively working on these issues and moving ahead. And you'll see a little bit more about how we plan to do that. So the next slide, I think, is really important as we as a group talk to many of you. So for those of you on this webinar who were on those calls with us, I really want to say thank you, because the way these partnership works is by being a true partnership. And so many of you have helped us think through how to structure and think about the climate challenge that we're talking to you about today. So I just want to say thank you. And what's come out of those conversations have been a couple key principles. And so this is very much the spirit of what we're trying to do. And I think you'll see that as we unfold in the slide after this to talk specifically about what we're asking organizations to do. So our goal in creating and managing and working with you on the Better Climate Challenge is to really identify that public goal for what leadership looks like. We call it sort of the North Star. What does leadership look like when it comes to thinking about a greenhouse gas reduction target for your organization? But we also want to create a strong platform that offers flexibility so that true leadership, and that can look really different for different kinds of organizations, is available. So we want a program that offers flexibility. Our goal, just like it has been for the past 10 years through the Better Buildings Initiative, is not to over-engineer a solution. It's really avoiding that, but really defining modern leadership on carbon and understanding that there's lots of different pathways and opportunities to get there, with, again, the whole goal of being able to demonstrate real world action and opportunities and success, so that's happening across the US economy. It's in buildings, it's in multifamily housing, it's in manufacturing plants, it's in industrial facilities. It's trying to understand the broad scope of where we need to decarbonize and how those opportunities are similar, but also how they're different. And one really important part of one of the principles that we have as part of this challenge is to continue to prioritize energy efficiency. If you look at all the analysis that not only the Department of Energy has done, but a lot of folks thinking about the issues, we're never going to reach our decarbonization goals without maximizing our energy efficiency. And so this effort really does continue to build on the work, again, that many of you have done with us and are doing with us as part of Better Buildings and Better Plants, but continues that through so that energy efficiency remains a priority and a key part of the steps, if you will, an organization takes when it's thinking about how to reach its carbon goals. So without further ado, here's really, next slide, here's what we're asking organizations that want to work with us on the Better Climate Challenge to commit to. This is a portfolio-wide challenge. So again, just like the work that we've done with many of you in the past, this really is a portfolio-wide target. It's a portfolio-wide reduction in greenhouse gas emissions of at least 50%. If you want to set a number higher, and we know there are a number of you who have asked us if you could, a number higher than that is terrific in the next 10 years. So at least 50% in the next 10 years. A couple of things that are really important to mention about that goal. It includes scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. This is not scope 3. This is not embodied carbon supply chain. This is very much focused on scope 1 and scope 2. For the 50% target, we're encouraging organizations to not use offsets. It's really offsets aren't going to be part of the leadership that we're looking for in the next 10 years. The baseline for any organization that wants to work with us is up to 5 years prior. We would love it if you chose a very recent year, but it's up to you. The past couple of years have been a little wonky for a variety of reasons with the pandemic. So we wanted you to establish a baseline that works well for you. We are going to be reporting out the results of the climate challenge in absolute terms. So we're really encouraging those who work with us to set an absolute target. We can work with those who, for whatever reason unique to their organization, need to focus on an intensity-based target, but we really do encourage folks to establish an absolute target. And then to pick up on the point that we ended on the last slide, we are working with organizations who will set an energy efficiency sub-target, if you will. We really want focus on energy efficiency and making it clear that that's a really important part of what we call the waterfall. Focus on efficiency as the very first step in reducing your carbon. I've talked to a couple of organizations who shall remain nameless, but who said, you know, we actually have stopped paying as much of attention to energy efficiency as we need to. We know that's wrong, we're coming back. And so that's part of the theory here, is to make sure that energy efficiency still is a very public, prominent, and integrated part of the commitment that you're making as far as portfolio-wide reductions. Next slide.
And just to add a couple of things to that slide,
yes,
Maria.
Please
so
do.
if we go back, we fully acknowledge that there's a bit of target fatigue in the market right now. There's lots of frameworks out there that are setting various guidelines and definitions of targets and what net zero means. And I saw a great cartoon a couple of days ago that said, with two guys complaining that there's 15 standards for doing something, I guess we need a more complete standard. Now we have 16 standards, right? So our intent here is not to reinvent the wheel or to make this complicated. Our intent is to sit on top of existing commitments and existing programs that you all already have in place or are looking to build for other purposes. The real focus here is on charting out clear, transparent pathways to decarbonization and in creating a peer exchange network to make that happen, right? 10 years ago, decarbonizing the typical portfolio was aspirational. Now it's foundational. And the question now is not what number do we pick, because at the end of the day, you want to pick a good number, but that's not really where the rubber hits the road. Where the rubber hits the road is, how do we incorporate energy efficiency? How do we do on-site renewables? What role does green power play? I've already seen 3 or 4 good questions around like role of virtual power purchase agreements and RECs, which we're going to get to in the Q&A. But the goal here is charting out real world transparent pathways, not on just creating another reporting burden or another target.
Perfect, Joe. Thank you. And what Joe said sort of tees up really nicely the next slide. So there's some really key elements to the challenge that we are encouraging all of you to join us in. One is, let me just start with the green title, and that's sort of the technical assistance. As Joe mentioned, there are lots of opportunities and lots of target setting opportunities in the market. Really sort of one of our beliefs is a differentiation of ours is really the technical assistance that is going to be part of what we're working with organizations with in the climate challenge. It's really understanding and working closely with you on specific technical assistance that you need that's unique to your organization. You know, like the Better Buildings Challenge, transparency is really important. We are asking organizations, again, all of you who've been working with us in Better Buildings, none of this should surprise you. It's very much in the DNA of what we've done, but it's really annual energy and emissions data. We are looking for you to share those with us as part of that so that we understand. Again, it all goes back to these pathways, which gets to the third leg of the stool, which is collaborating to demonstrate pathways and having you share your not only your barriers, but the solutions and the innovations that your organizations are taking as you look to and are successful at decarbonizing the buildings, housing, plants that you all own and operate. And I think this is really key for us at the Department of Energy. I think, there is such strong support and interest at DOE for this effort because of the need to work with all of you, because this opportunity is really a place to capture, understand, and react to where aspiration meets the real world. We have goals. How can we get there? Where are we getting stuck? How do we work together to solve those problems? And how is it that we can use this platform to drive faster uptake of the solutions that are successful organizations pursuing them? So next couple of slides. Next one. Great. So it's really, I think, important to just be very clear about what it is that an organization is committing to and what DOE will do and its side of the bargain as your partner in this effort. So I think we've talked about several of these, but just to be clear, we're looking for organizations to set a public goal and then work to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions at least 50% over the next 10 years, identify and pursue an energy efficiency target to be very clear about the work being done there. We are encouraging you to participate in at least one working group so that we really do get the feedback from you on barriers, best practices, solutions. Engage with us. That's really what we need. We need your voice, we need your help, we need your expertise, and we need your input. A very important part, I think, of lining organizations up with the relevant technical assistance will be an organization-wide plan. That's very much a part of what we're doing with those organizations who have been terrific enough to be have stepped up and are working with us on the underway low carbon pilot. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then to share your portfolio-wide energy performance, scope 1 and scope 2 emissions for the duration of the goal timeframe. And then of course, DOE is very excited about working with partners to provide technical assistance that supports all the different ways you're going to be pursuing doing this. It's measuring, tracking, and improving portfolio-wide performance. We really want to make sure that we are capturing and learning from you and getting best practices. The slide says best practices. I also think it's really important for you to know we're also keenly interested in where people are getting and organizations are getting stuck. So it's not only what's working, but what's not, because that's a place that not only is an important feedback mechanism for this opportunity, but across DOE and things like the research and development that DOE does through the national labs. That'll be very key. We're very key on what we know has worked so well for many of you, which is the peer-to-peer learning. And then we really want to recognize national leaders, people who can demonstrate and are demonstrating what they're doing, how they're doing it, so that, again, others can follow. Next. So it's always good, just last couple slides, why join? Well, I think most of these are fairly obvious for folks on the phone, but I think it's really important that there's a whole host of reasons. Some, like the first, is really, we believe, and we've designed this, as you saw from the principles that we laid out, that this is good for your organization. We wouldn't, we're very focused on this being a partnership. It's a voluntary market-based partnership. This has got to work for you, but there's no but. So our belief is that this is good for your organization for the future. It's an opportunity to save energy, save money, and just frankly be ready for the future. Lots of you are getting shareholder, stakeholder, employee, customer pressure to think about and lead on decarbonization. This is a terrific way for you to not only to continue to be leaders in your local communities and with those groups, but also on the national level. This is also a terrific opportunity to really drive market transformation with other leaders. We need organizations willing to step up and act and pursue and show these pathways now as a way to make this happen across the country. I think it's really the technical assistance and peer-to-peer exchange network that remains, I believe, one of the biggest things we can offer the market as the Department of Energy, our ability to convene really leaders who are working on this, experts who can help, and the ability for you to share and learn from each other is, sort of invaluable. And that's what our partners tell us. And so that's why we leaned into that part of this partnership very hard. We think that's really key. And then it's really recognition. It's recognition not only for you and your organization, but I also think it's recognition that serves the country well, because it's important for organizations to see folks like them, right? School districts want to see other school districts doing this. Multifamily housing needs to understand what's possible. Same for commercial real estate, healthcare, industrial facilities. You get the idea. So we really do want to recognize you because it's a really important way to get the word out about what's possible and who's doing it and how they're getting it done. Next slide. So I mentioned this quickly. I just want to give a quick shout out to the organizations that are working with us as part of the low carbon pilot. These organizations, I think we've learned a lot from these organizations that are going to continue to work with us because they've picked 2 buildings to prioritize over the next 2 years, I guess now, year and a half, to begin to showcase real world pathways. And it's really learning from these organizations and what it's taken. As you can see, one of the things that has been really important in this effort is the creation of action plans, right? It's beginning to break down the big goal and then how to get there. And it's been very important and hopefully helpful for those organizations, I would say, for the Department of Energy to be a part of that action plan creation and the conversations and understanding what's possible, what's doable, what's the correlation between the emissions reductions and the savings and resilience benefits and things like that. And so it really has been our first foray. And so it's this effort that's also foundational to the work that we're talking to you about today. So I just wanted to let folks know that's underway. And then Joe sort of spoke to the next slide briefly. What about if my organization already has a goal or has other commitments? How does that work here, right? So our goal, let's go back to our principles. Our goal is to work to define, profile, and work with true market leadership. If you've already set a goal, that's terrific. As long as it's 50% reduction goal in the next 10 years, that goal matters. You don't need to set another goal. Better Buildings and Better Plants partners have already set an efficiency goal. They are well on their way. Many of them are working with us currently on the low carbon pilot. That's a very foundational piece where it becomes very easy to progress to and commit to hopefully a 50% portfolio-wide goal. And then there are other opportunities in the market, and we will work with you on those. For example, a number of organizations have set goals through the Science Based Targets group. We've been working with SBT, and it's our hope that those goals don't need to be renegotiated, and especially those organizations that have an approved 1.5 degree aligned science-based target. I think the pathway here is very straightforward and very complementary. And that's really the word I would use. Our goal is to be complementary to the efforts and the work you're doing. Again, there is it is a 50% greenhouse gas reduction goal, scope 1, scope 2 by 2030 at least. But if you've got other goals, if you've got goals that align or are complementary with that, we will work with you on that. As Joe said, the goal is an important part of what we're doing, but another key part and the real distinction and distinguishing part of this challenge is working with the Department of Energy and getting the technical assistance that's available and the peer-to-peer learning. So I think we have one more slide and then we'll go to Q&A. So if you want to join, we would love to have you. And so there's all sorts of ways to do that. And we can send up follow-up materials to folks on this call. Current Better Buildings partners, you can email your program contacts. You can email me. You can email Better Buildings at ee.doe.gov. There's information on the Better Buildings Solutions Center. We are, for those organizations who know they want to join and this is the right thing for them, we're hoping that there's an opportunity in early November to highlight those organizations that quickly know that they want to participate with us. If organizations are willing to commit by November 1st or 2nd, that would be terrific. And we would include you as part of any announcement that that your organization has stepped up to this challenge. But if it doesn't work by early November, organizations can join whenever it works for them. I realize sometimes it takes time to work this up the organizational chain, so we would love to have you whenever you're able to join. So with that, let me ask Joe if there's anything I left off, and then we can jump to Q&A.
I think that covers it. And I see a couple of good questions in here already to kick us off.
All right, that sounds great. So I can't see the Q&A, so Joe, I'm going to trouble you to sort of read some of the questions off, and then let's see if we can't hit them.
Sounds good. Well, a couple of questions in here about sort of what counts as an emissions reduction. Happy to wade into that a bit. So we say no offsets. One person was asking, what does that mean exactly? Carbon offsets, RECs, etc. We are referring specifically to carbon offset certificates. So cases where you're paying for an avoided or a removed metric ton of carbon dioxide are not allowed. Renewable energy certificates and other forms of green power procurement are allowed in the under the climate challenge. So that includes, obviously things like virtual power purchase agreements, buying unbundled RECs on the open market, buying bundled RECs from named power generation sources, right? Pretty much any type of green power procurement is included. Generally, I think the philosophy that we're going for here and that the market needs to move towards is that operational emissions reductions are better than those that occur offsite or not directly in your own operations. So one of the reasons that energy efficiency is kind of top priority for us is that is and always will be the first fuel when it comes to achieving emissions reductions. Same thing with on-site renewables, but we're encouraging kind of a focus on the operational piece, but yes, RECs and green power procurement are included. There was another question in here about whether utility grid reductions will count. So I assume you mean like the general decarbonization of the grid there. Yeah, we're not going to mandate to you how you do your carbon accounting, right? And doing carbon accounting both location-based and market-based is the standard that we're kind of aligning with. So those emissions reductions that you get from the grid greening where you operate your properties or your operations in general is real. That is a real emissions reduction, right? That there really is renewable energy being brought on the grid there. That being said, we are also encouraging partners to think a little bit more holistically or in a more advanced fashion about market-based emissions, right? Where are you actually getting your power from? What, if possible, is it possible to learn the grid composition or the fuel mix for the specific utility that you're buying power for? Do you have opportunities to shift your load to different times during the day when you're going to maximize the carbon impact of that? Right? These are all questions we want to explore, but yes, location-based emissions and the general decarbonization of the grid will be allowed to count towards what you consider your 50% emissions reduction.
Great. I'm trying to read through. If people see me looking down, I'm looking at some of these questions because I finally figured out. So let's see if we're trying to, let's see if we can't, respond to the questions that are upvoted the most. So if you like a question there, we'll try and see if we can do that. So one of the questions is, will Energy Star Portfolio Manager be used to track greenhouse gas emissions, or will there be another tool? The answer is both. We are working with our sister agency, EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, on Portfolio Manager and the complementary tools that they're creating and testing now to account for greenhouse gas emissions. And so, yes, that will be one way to, again, the goal here, is to make it as easy as possible and to not reinvent the wheel where we don't need to. If you don't use Portfolio Manager, just like Better Buildings, we will, there will be a spreadsheet for folks to fill out. So we'll work with you on that. But the short answer to that question is yes. So.
Great. And
so you take the next one?
Sure. There's another question about how we account for growth in our portfolio. What happens if new buildings or new operations enter the portfolio or exit the portfolio during the period of the target? So 2 thoughts on that. One is that we are encouraging partners to set an absolute emissions reduction target if possible, because at the end of the day, where the world needs to get to is a reduction in absolute emissions, right? Total amount of carbon dioxide and other gases put into the atmosphere. That said, we do acknowledge that there are certain sectors and certain business circumstances or just general markets where there's a lot of change in the portfolio, a lot of growth or shrinkage. And so an absolute target can be challenging in those cases. And an intensity-based target is necessary and really, frankly, a more business relevant metric for you. So we do, as Maria mentioned, offer the flexibility to set an intensity-based target as well. We'll just want to work with you on the right target to set and making sure that it's sort of in the spirit of the ambition intended by the program, while offering enough flexibility in the metric that it's not overly burdensome.
Correct. And just like for those of you who've worked with us in Better Buildings and Better Plants, growth for your organization is good, right? So you don't get penalized by growing and adding more, whether it's plants or buildings, or so we'll work with you on that. That's good as far as we're concerned. So we'll work with you on that, just to be very clear. You don't get penalized for having an organization that's growing and thriving. In fact, we want to capture the role that decarbonization and increased energy efficiency can play as part of a growth strategy. So I think that's very much part of the way we have handled things in the past 10 years, and certainly the way we would want to work with our partners moving forward. So somebody asked, my turn, Joe. Are federal agencies joining this program and committing to 50% reductions? I'm going to answer that in two ways. We have been talking to GSA. They're quite keen on this. I think a lot of federal facilities and agencies are waiting for an executive order to come out. There is an executive order that is, I think, in the works to define leadership for the federal facilities. We'll see. I think this is going to be very much in line with sort of the work that we're doing here. Once that EO is launched, I think we are anxious to sort of figure out the synergies with the federal family, because the federal government needs to lead in this space as well. And I think that's very much the thinking by the executive order as well. Joe, you want to take the next one?
Yep. Let's see. So a question about whether fuel switching will count towards emissions reductions. Yes, anything that would be reflected in greenhouse gas protocol compliant carbon accounting would also be reflected in this emissions reduction. So we're not in the business of sort of picking and choosing exactly what can and cannot count, other than the carbon offsets question, of course. Yeah, if it would be reflected in your standard greenhouse gas inventory, for example, switching to a less carbon intensive fuel, that will count towards your reduction.
Great. And there's oopsie, gosh, it keeps switching on my screen. So there was a question about, will there be a push to revise building codes, especially for commercial industrial sectors, to make way for an emphasis on energy efficiency? Yes, but that's not part of this effort. There's a separate group at the Department of Energy working on building codes. And so obviously, since we all work at the same federal agency, we are talking to each other. That won't happen under this effort, but there is work on building codes happening at DOE, and we will link up with that effort. But again, that's not part of this portfolio-wide challenge with organizations throughout the market. Joe, you want to do how vehicle fleets fit in, or you want me to do that one?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's a good question. Let's do that one. Yeah, so we are, it's actually worth taking a step back and describing what we mean by scope 1 and 2 emissions here. So again, we're talking about the standard emissions categories included. That includes stationary combustion, so natural gas, boilers, diesel generators, et cetera, on site. That includes mobile combustion, which includes fleets that are owned and operated by the organization. And then that includes also any fugitive emissions like refrigerants or industrial process emissions, if those are material to your business. So we'll use the same materiality threshold kind of guidelines that the corporate protocol or the greenhouse gas protocol does. And then scope 2, of course, refers to electricity consumption on site. So per that definition, yes, fleet vehicles are included in the challenge if they are a material source of emissions for your organization.
Thanks, Joe. Next question, does the commitment need to cover every building in our U.S. portfolio? Okay, I can answer that. The questions are moving on my screen, so I'll answer that one. That was not the one I thought I was answering, but let's answer it. Does the commitment need to cover every building in our U.S. portfolio, or can we commit individual plants? Your whole portfolio is the short answer to that question. That's why we recognize that this challenge is just that. It's a very ambitious, very audacious portfolio-wide enterprise goal. So the intent, as it has been in the past, is to actually have it cover all the buildings or plants or multifamily housing units or buildings in your portfolio. So all of them, the whole portfolio.
Yeah, I see a couple I can do rapid fire here. So do companies or organizations need to get their greenhouse gas inventory verified through a third party in order to participate? No, you don't. It's generally, I'd say a good practice to do that, but not necessary for this challenge. And then another question, a good one, is that have we considered or mapped how the Better Climate Challenge definitions and targets compare to other frameworks? Yes, we spent a lot of time thinking about that, again, in the spirit of not wanting to reinvent the wheel or create additional, technicalities or complexity here. So happy to talk through that. If you're, as a partner, you're participating in other frameworks or using other definitions, we're happy to talk about how those map to this. I think, as Maria said, we're particularly well aligned with the 1.5 degree science-based target methodology. And yeah, happy to have an offline conversation. There's too many frameworks to cover at this moment, but we feel well aligned with what else is going on in the market.
All right, next one for me is, if our company's emissions goal is global and we don't have US only data, can we still take part in this program? That would be one we'd want you to talk to us about, because we really are looking to, as has been the case through Better Buildings and the Better Plants Challenge, many organizations have truly an international footprint. And when they adopt a goal like this, they make it international and organization-wide, truly across borders, not just domestic. But we are trying to track and understand domestically what's going on. So let us work with you on that and see if there isn't a way that we can work together on that. But typically what we're looking for is US domestic data at a facility level.
Another question here: if an organization has already achieved net zero status, is there still a way to participate in the initiative since a 50% reduction will not be possible? It's another case where we want to talk. Like we want to create a big tent that brings in all applicable leaders. There's flexibility in how you set your baseline. There's flexibility in what metrics you choose. So we'd want to talk about specifically what kind of flavor of net zero you've achieved and what that looks like for your organization. But Eric would err on the side of definitely wanting to have that conversation and find a way to make it work.
Yeah, and let me just add on to that, Joe, if I can. I think what Joe said is exactly right. And to the extent that organizations have figured out some of this, those are some of those pathways that we'd be anxious, excited, and very interested in capturing. So I think it's, again, we're looking at things that don't rely on offsets as a way to sort of meet that goal and are very, sort of understanding the baseline and things like that. But the bottom line is, if the whole point here is, if you figured out how to do it and do it well and are willing to share that, we would like to work with you. So please do reach out to us on that, because we're really trying to capture. This goes back again, those principles really are etched in all of our minds as we think through this. It's really, how do you identify, recognize, and describe to others true leadership? And so talk to us about that, because we would love to be able to share sort of pathways for sure. All right, let's see. Is there any direct funding available in association with the challenge for building specific engineering, design, and capital implementation? No, is the short answer to that question. There is not. I think there's another question about, can you be a little bit more specific about the technical assistance that's available? I think at this stage, so those of you who have looked at the fact sheet and the partnership agreement see that the word draft is still on there. I think at this point, we're still very anxious to work with the organizations that join first and begin to understand that. I think, to be quite honest, the need for technical assistance is going to vary dramatically. We stand ready to help organizations at all sorts of different levels. And so I think it's going to depend on what the organizations need. We're not going to send, we're not going to send folks to your facilities to walk the facility with you, but I think there's quite robust technical assistance that we're willing to provide to think through the options. I think the other thing we're asking, just as a reminder, is help us sit on some work groups, help us think through where people are getting stuck, where you are needing technical assistance. It may be that we begin to develop work groups designed to understand various challenges and how we can share learning and expertise on those. So I think that's going to, just as it has for the past 10 years for the Better Buildings and Better Plants partners, that will depend on the organization, what you need, and the resources that we have in the national labs to be able to help with that.
Let's see, there was one question. So we can find it again.
There's a baseline question.
Y'all are very active y'all are very active upvoters, which makes this a fun, like, follow the whack-a-mole question exercise. So there's a question about, just to confirm that industrial process emissions or fugitive emissions are included in scope 1. Yes, confirming that they are, but again, if they're material large enough. Usually the greenhouse gas protocol sets the materiality threshold at about 5%, with some flexibility depending on situation. But yes, if you have material industrial process or other direct emissions from within your facilities, those would be included. And then another question here. If the baseline is set 5 years back, for example, 2016, does that mean that 50% needs to be reached by 2026? Or is it still 10 years from today? Good question. It's 10 years from the baseline. So it's a 10-year reduction target starting from the baseline year. Again, our encouragement here is to set a more recent baseline if at all possible. We just offer the flexibility to go back by 5 years, recognizing that there are different realities, different business circumstances that might need force you to set a further back baseline.
Here's a question that I'm not sure I understand. So maybe Joe, together we can answer it. One is, will there be flexibility to adjust goals down the road? 10 years is a long time to stay with the same goal when the market is always evolving. So there's always the opportunity to make your goal more stringent, right? So if you came in at a 50% goal and then thought, well, we knocked that one out of the park, we want to do 60 or 70, that's of course within your ability as partners in the program to do that. So I think that's the answer. I think, part of what we're trying to offer here, again, going back to those principles, is really what's the North Star today? What is it? It's at least 50% carbon reduction in the next 10 years. So I think that would be the minimum goal moving forward with but as a voluntary market-based program, we can, there's flexibility, but the goal is we wouldn't go under 50%. It would be at least 50%. So
yeah, and I just wanted to correct the answer I just gave. I think I missed.
I was just going to say, Joe.
Yeah, I think I answered that wrong. I think I said baseline date when I meant join date. So yes, sorry, it's 10 years. The target is 10 years from the join date, from the time when you join the challenge, not from the baseline date.
I didn't want to have to contradict Joe. That was going to be a challenge, right?
That was my bad.
So, okay, yeah. So the goal is by 2030. So, and you can, right, okay. How are leased properties treated in this program? I think we will work with you on that. Our expectation is if they're long-term leases, those are part of your operational organizational portfolio, and those would be included as this. But there are all sorts of, as you all know, nuances to that question. Some of our hospitality partners have different lease structures. So we'll work with you. I mean, the goal, again, is to really think about the spirit of what we're trying to do and to have your organizations lead with the buildings, plants, housing within their control and within their sphere of influence, and to affect the carbon reductions associated with those buildings. And so that would include leased properties. So if it's within your portfolio, if it's in your operational control, we would want you to include those. If there's a reason not to, we'll work with you on that. It's the kind of thing that we're quite happy to work with partners on, because you really want this to be about true leadership and doing things that make sense for you as an organization, for you as a private sector business. But we also want to be mindful that this is about the spirit of what it is we're trying to do and what it takes to decarbonize buildings. And sometimes lease structures can be an important place to, and an important opportunity to do that. They can also be a sticking block or a sticking point and stumbling block. And so if there's something there and we need to understand the barriers associated with leased properties, that would be something we'd want to work with you on, but also get feedback for how it is and if there's any unique challenges associated with those buildings. Bottom line, they'd be part of your portfolio. We'll work with you.
I see a couple more questions here. So is there a minimum required target reduction per scope towards the 50%? As in, does like a certain amount would have to come from scope 1 or scope 2? The answer is no. We're thinking of scope 1 and 2 as a combined number. So if you think you can get most of your reductions from scope 2 versus scope 1, that's totally fine. That's not specified. Another question is, how does source energy generated from community choice clean energy aggregators figure into carbon emissions for a portfolio? There's going to be a lot of special cases like this, right, where there's different types of utility contracts, different types of power procurement occurring. My kind of blanket answer to that is, if it affects your kind of standard location and or market-based emissions factors in a carbon footprint, it will count towards this, or it will be included in this. But if you have particular kind of weird situations we want to talk about, we're always happy to hop on a call to discuss those.
There is a question. We are in an energy intensive industry that relies on energy use to smelt iron and steel. A 50% reduction is not technically possible. How do you participate? We will work with the energy intensive sectors we understand that a 50% reduction goal is probably not possible for those very intensive energy sectors. A 25% goal is a more appropriate target for energy intensive industries. And that's the challenge that we are setting for the energy intensive sectors, is a 25% energy reduction goal, a greenhouse gas reduction goal. So we're hoping that that works. We know that's still an ambitious target for many, but having looked at the analysis and really thought and worked a lot internally and with many of you on the appropriate goal for energy intensive industries, it's a 25% reduction goal.
Yeah, a question here about how do carbon capture projects fit in? That's an interesting one and a good one. Generally speaking, if you are doing the carbon capture within your operations, right? If you're investing in it directly, as in you own the equipment that's doing it and you control the carbon capture, if you're capturing it from your own scope 1 emissions, then yeah, that would count. The thing that we're not counting is for buying carbon offset certificates from other parties on the open market. So happy to dive, if you have a specific situation you're thinking of there, happy to talk more about that. But yeah, if it's within your own operations, then yes, reducing your own direct carbon emissions would count certainly.
Okay, I'm going to take one. We have several sites that are very small leased offices that we don't have much control over. They represent a very small percentage of our total emissions. Can we exclude them? Yes, probably. Within the current Better Buildings framework, we allow organizations to exclude about 10%. If you've got, a small part of your portfolio up to 10% that you want to exclude for reasons like this, we'll work with you on that. So I want to answer, I wanted to answer that question for a couple of reasons, right? This is, as I said, sort of a voluntary partnership. We're very much driven by the spirit of what we're trying to do. And we're really wanting to focus on what leadership looks like and the actions that you're taking. And if it makes more sense to focus on 95% of your portfolio because you think you can reduce carbon emissions there by at least 50% over the next 10 years, that's okay with us. That's the goal, right? So we're very, this is a partnership. We want partners who are engaged on the big items and the spirit of what we're trying to do. And so with that in mind, it would be like we've done in the Better Buildings Challenge, it would be fine to exclude a small part of your portfolio that you don't have control over. I mean, right? It'd be sort of hard to ask you to include that. So we're okay with that.
In the same spirit of the question, can an organization participate by addressing only buildings, not including fleets? Again, if the fleets are a substantial portion of your total scope 1 emissions, then we really do want to include fleets. Now, that being said, doesn't mean that the bulk of your emissions reductions have to come from those fleets, right? There's flexibility in where they come from. And a huge part of our effort here is to acknowledge that operations are complex. There's lots of different emission sources, and the marginal cost to reduce emissions is not the same from one building to the next or one part of your operations to the next. So part of what we're trying to do here is say, okay, in operational profiles that include buildings and possibly industry and manufacturing, possibly fleets, electric consumption, where are the most cost effective and the most immediately applicable emissions reduction pathways? And in order to really understand that, we need to include kind of a full set of scope 1 and 2 emissions wherever possible in these targets.
Here's a question. Will there be working groups with technology companies to address gaps, barriers, and what is needed? I don't know. You're going to tell us, because this is a partnership. So we're going to convene our partners. We're going to work with our partners to figure out what kind of working groups we really need to stand up and convene as the Department of Energy. My guess is we could have an infinite number of working groups. No one's got time for an infinite number of anything. So I think we're going to have to triage and prioritize. But I think that we are open to your feedback about and understanding, and that's sort of the importance of what we're trying to track here, is not only what's working, but where you're getting stuck, where do we need to, and where are partners asking for the ability to sit down with peers to talk about sort of what the opportunities are. So in part, yet to be TBD, but you can help us figure that out. And you can weigh in if that's important and would be of value to you. That's certainly something that you can bring to the table and we can talk about. Somebody asked a question about portfolio manager. I don't know, because you're asking if it will be updated to include market-based emissions factors. I don't know the answer to that question, so we'll just have to get back to you on that, or we'll have to ask EPA as the owner and operator portfolio manager. So.
Yeah, and there's a good question, recent one here, about how the success of the program will be tracked, especially if different participants are reporting different types of emissions. Very good point. One of the reasons we're asking for kind of ongoing data reporting of energy and emissions over time is so we have a lot of that raw data and can display it in ways that are most interesting and analytical and useful to everyone. So I think that the 50% in 10 years requirement is quite clear. Each organization is going to define, exactly what their metric is a little bit differently. As I said before, we're encouraging absolute targets, but allow for intensity-based targets. But at the end of the day, we'll be reporting out, program outcomes in the form of absolute emissions reductions, and then other kind of various intensity-based metrics as well. So how we talk about this will evolve. That's one of the things we want your input on as well, is sort of how do we work together to standardize the way that we as a group of industries talk about emissions reporting and talk about measuring the success of a decarbonization pathway.
Okay, another question. So we'll do questions for about another 3 or 4 minutes. We'll try and get through as many of them as we can. But I do want to make sure that we end on time and just have a few opportunities to sort of have a couple of follow-up things for folks. But let's try, Joe, we'll get through as many of these as we can. One question is, would we work with our existing Better Plants TAM? TAM stands for Technical Assistant Manager. I don't know. You might, if that person has the skills and expertise that you need in what you're trying to do when it comes to decarbonizing your facilities. I know that the Better Plants team at DOE is terrific in matching partners with the right assistance for the projects that they have. So they will work with you on that. So if that's something where you're like, yay, I still want to work with that TAM, okay. And if you need other assistance, then I'm confident that we would be able to make that happen as well. Joe, do you want to do the one to confirm electricity supply? But I just lost it. Oh, there it is. Electricity supply with embedded wind RECs is allowed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions profile of the organization.
Electricity supply embedded within wind RECs. Yes, that is correct. That is allowed to reduce. Yeah, wind RECs or any other kind of RECs that as long as you are retiring the REC for your organization and be able to claim that credit in your carbon accounting, then yes, that would count.
Joe, any last question?
Just do one more scan.
There was a question about superior energy performance, and I'm just not, that's a separate group at DOE working on that. So that one I saw early on, but can't comment on that because it would have to be an I don't know. And so there's the answer to that question. I don't know, but we can get back to you on that if folks are interested. We can connect you with the right folks that work on SEP at DOE. How was that? A sentence with 2 acronyms back to back. I hate to do that, but okay, Joe, you're up.
Yeah, the last one I see here is just a question about refrigerants and to what extent we're going to work either from a technical assistance perspective or just in general work on tackling refrigerants. Yeah, we're very interested in dealing with refrigerants and working with you to figure out what a decarbonization pathway looks like there. I think refrigerants are often overlooked in a lot of portfolios. In a lot of commercial buildings, for example, there's essentially very little or no refrigerant leakage on an annual basis. But then if you have a major refrigerant leak in 1 year, your chiller breaks or something, you can have an emissions impact that's just completely outsized relative to your standard operating emissions, right? And then there's some space types, cold storage, certain types of warehouses, retail in some cases, where the refrigerants are a material source of emissions. So very excited to work with you all to think through how how to bring refrigerants into the fold when it comes to emissions reductions opportunities.
Terrific. Thanks, Joe. So we just have a couple minutes left, and as promised, we want to make sure that we get folks out on time. I just want to thank Joe. Thanks for being with us. But equally importantly, thank you to everyone who joined us today on the webinar. We really appreciate it. We appreciate you all passed the spontaneity test, because we really appreciate everyone jumping on a webinar with fairly short notice. You can see my email is up on the screen. Please email me if you have any questions or interested in joining. We also have a lot of information on the Better Building Solutions Center. That includes sort of the fact sheet, frequently asked questions, and the partnership agreement for this effort. So just as a reminder, we're looking for folks that know they want to join fairly quickly. It's going to be great to highlight you in the coming weeks as organizations that know they want to jump in, but we want everybody on this call to be able to join at some point. And so we are happy and are standing by to help answer any questions and hopefully make this work for your organization. It is a big, ambitious ask. It is a portfolio-wide commitment. It is a ask to be transparent and to share what you're doing and to learn from others and help lead this country. But that's what makes this a very exciting opportunity for all of us. The time's now really to address climate change and to be able to do it. And I think organizations like all of yours are the place to start and the place that really can help steer the ship as we identify the pathways and the way we're going to be able to mitigate the impacts of climate change. So thank you to all of you who are already working with us in Better Buildings and Better Plants, whether it's through the Alliance or the program or the challenge. We can't do it without you. And we are so excited to be able to offer this new opportunity and are really hoping that organizations would step up and partner with us on this. We can't wait to work with you, to learn from you, and to highlight the work you're doing, because that's really what's going to make a difference in the coming years. So with that, thank you again to everybody for joining us on today's call. We really appreciate it. Please do reach out if you have questions. We're here, and we look forward to having all of you as partners in the Better Climate Challenge soon. Thanks again.
Thanks, everybody.